Yeah. When Patty O'Neill and I, we worked together for about 12 years until she passed away. I think it was maybe a couple of years before she passed that we didn't do much theater wise together because her health was on the decline, and so she had to take some time to just focus on trying to get better. And it was also during that time, this is very early 90s, is when I became a Buddhist. And and so my faith community is with the New England Peace Pagoda, Nipponzan Myohoji Buddhist order. Sister Claire Carter had asked me if I would make this pilgrimage with her to retrace the journey of the transatlantic slave trade. I was still doing a lot of theater and with Gregory Dean Smith, and we were working with my company, First World Images. You videotaped a lot of our shows, and so my world made a flip flop. I want to go back just a little bit to talk about my work with Gregory Dean. He and I really connected on a very spiritual level in terms of our work as theater artists. And what I loved about working with him was his openness to try anything. Because during the time he was working with me, he was also working with Maxine Klein and Little Flags Theater down in Worcester. That was some powerful theater work, and it was agitprop theater, it was protest theater, it was very political theater. And Maxine Klein is this icon in in that world. She worked with labor unions, and Gregory Dean went down to Worcester and started working with her. And that, I just started thinking about that just a couple of days ago, when I knew I was going to do this interview. Is, my goodness, the range, because he was doing African American theater, he was doing cabaret theater, he was a dancer and a singer, he was a performer, you know, and I mean, he's a real entertainer. And then to see him totally go off the grid for a while and work with Little Flags Theater, that's historical. That is a iconic theater company. Maxine Klein is an icon in that world, and he worked side by side with Maxine Klein, and he can tell you some very funny stories about Maxine, because she was no joke and she didn't play, and so there were many arguments. But she loved him. She absolutely loved him and loved working with him. And I think she got upset with him when she moved the company to Missouri and he didn't want to relocate. But anyway, he came back to our world of theater, and we worked really, really hard and in such a creative way. He helped to create a lot of the pieces. He created his own characters for the shows that we wrote, and it was just brilliant working with him. When I decided to take this offer of directing the Interfaith Pilgrimage of the Middle Passage, I was stepping into a whole different world. And it was not the world of theater, you know? And it was a spiritual journey. And I talked to a lot of my artist friends to see if they wanted to go on this journey, and they weren't ready for that. They were like, no, this is what I do. I'm staying. I can't see myself doing that. Gregory Dean was on all over it. He was like, sister, let's do it. I'll go. And I said, yeah, but it means you're going to have to give up theater for a year. He says, I don't care. Let's do this. He says, and theater is, life is theater. We can do theater on the road. So he was always like willing and excited about trying new things and doing something different. And so he helped with a lot of the organizing in the very, very beginning. It took us 6 years. It took me 6 years to organize the pilgrimage. But when we set foot to pavement, he was right there. And he always had my back as a director of this journey. He was always right there, and he never faltered. He walked every step of the way from Amherst, Massachusetts, well, actually from Leverett, Massachusetts to Cape Town, South Africa. He never stopped. Some people would leave and then come back. Not him. And he carried that Pan-African flag all the way. All the way. And I've got gorgeous pictures of him with that flag in his hand and chanting Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. He was so focused. You never saw him in that line of walkers laughing and talking with people like some of the young ones were doing. He chanted all the way. He would chant until he was hoarse, and he walked every step of the way. And I love him for that. I so appreciate him. I appreciate everybody that made that journey. But there's something special about that man, about Gregory Dean. And then he went a step further than most of us, and there was a small contingent that went to Brazil because we weren't able to make the Brazil trip, but it was important that we go to Brazil because the largest population of Africans that were taken from the continent were taken to Brazil. And so he went on that journey. And that's a fascinating story. Only he can tell of that journey from Brazil. And then he met us in West Africa. I just love this guy. And don't get me wrong. We had fights, he and I, and we would have arguments and disagreements and not speaking to each other for months on end. But that's what family does, right? And that's how I feel about Brother NorthStar. He's family. He'd stop speaking to me, or I'd stop speaking to him, and I'm like, oh, he'll get over it. We'll be friends again. How long's it gonna be this time? But I really love that brother. He's the brother that I never had. I saw the change in him. Not so early on in the pilgrimage, but when I'm thinking like maybe halfway through, like when we got to the Caribbean, I think it's really started to hit him. I mean, we were hearing these horrific stories of slavery here on this continent. But when we got to the Caribbean and when we got to West Africa, we started hearing the stories from that perspective, from their perspective. And it hit all of us. It moved all of us. But I could see a change in him, and I could see that he was starting to learn something about himself as an African. Just like I started learning things about myself as an African, not an African American, but as an African, and what we lost. And I knew that I wasn't going to come back to the U.S. after the pilgrimage. I knew I wanted to stay on the continent to learn more about what it means to be an African. What did I lose, and how can I find it? How can I regain it? And I think it was the same for Gregory Dean. I think there was just 1, 2, 3, 4 of us that remained on the continent after the pilgrimage. Everybody else came back. But we decided that we were going to stay. Well, actually, not so much Gregory Dean, but he didn't want to come back to the U.S. for a while. He knew that his journey had to continue. So my journey had to continue, and it was 6 months after the pilgrimage ended that I moved to Cape Town. As well as Tim Bullock and Myrna Munkus. The three of us stayed on the continent. We moved back 6 months later, 5 months later, we moved back. Gregory Dean came back here, regrouped, And then he started his journey as a peace pilgrim. And I was fascinated. I was like, wow, he has really transformed. He didn't go back into theater. He didn't go back into entertaining. He started dressing differently. He started eating differently. You know, he was eating more healthy. He was very aware of how he needed to treat his body, how he needed to treat other people, and how he wanted to live his life in a more peaceful and activist way. And so he created a persona for himself, you know, the NorthStar. And I want to travel the world. I want to go to different continents. I want to share my love with the world and be peaceful and learn about different cultures. So he's a real cultural activist. You know, I call myself a cultural activist, and my focus is Africa and the diaspora, the African diaspora, but his is the world, the globe. He's a global healer, you know, and he is a healer because I think that he has touched people's lives in a way that make them see his humanity, and helping them to look at humanity in a more peaceful and respectful way, you know. I mean, he was going to places where they probably never even seen a black person, you know, in person, you know. He's got so many friends all over the world now that love him, that he can go and revisit. I remember one time he called me and Ingrid son, and I was like, where are you? And he was like, I'm in Iceland. I was like, no. What are you doing in Iceland? He said, oh, it's beautiful here. And I'm staying with this wonderful family, with these wonderful people that I met. And, you know, and I'm like, well, where are you headed after that? Well, I think I'm going to Greenland. And then he named some other place in the world that you wouldn't normally think about going to, you know. And he would call me from these various places all over the world. He would always check in with me, which I loved, you know. And we have a dear friend, Donna, who lives in Baltimore, and she and Greg, she still calls him Smitty. Where is Smitty? I said, girl, he just called me from Iceland last week. She said, Iceland? She said, oh my God, that's just like him, isn't it? You know. And you know, she always inquired about him because we just both marveled at this whole transformation of this spirit, this amazing friend of ours. You know, he's a wonder. I just feel like I opened a path for him. I don't want to take so much credit for him transforming his life. I think it was going to happen anyway. We just don't know what shape or form it would have taken. With the pilgrimage set him on the path that he's on now. I like to think that I had something to do with it just by offering him this vehicle, you know, this journey, to walk this journey with me, brother, you know, and he did. And he did, which was so lovely, which was so, he's such a loyal friend. And there were other friends that came on the pilgrimage that I'm no longer friends with because they weren't loyal. I was loyal to them, but they weren't loyal to me. And so there was a parting of the ways with a few people that came on the pilgrimage that I thought were my friends. But he was steady. Even when I would get angry with him on the pilgrimage and we would have fights, not fights, but, you know, disagreements. And I was like, oh my God, he's really getting on my nerves today, you know? And I would just like ignore him for a couple of days because, you know, and he didn't care. I mean, it's not that he didn't care because, you know, he didn't want me to be mad at him, but he would just still, you know, see me in the morning, morning Ingrid-san, and give me a kiss on the cheek. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You know, like a sister would do, when the brother's getting on her nerves, you know. And I'm sure I got on his nerves a lot too. He was steady with that friendship and with that loyalty. And I so appreciate him for that, because I needed that on the pilgrimage, because that was a hard job. It was the hardest job I've ever had. It was very, very hard and arduous and painful, you know. And he was right there, and he would sing every morning, and the preparation he did. That's when he started eating differently, I think. That's when I noticed his eating habits and juicing and just always eating something healthy, you know, and walking. He walked he really prepared himself. And that's why he was able to walk this earth as much as he did. That's why he was able to walk this earth for 13 months on that pilgrimage, in heat and cold and rain. He was out there and loving it, you know. It was never begrudgingly like, I don't feel like walking today. It was never that, you know. He would be up and ready, you know.